Welcome, everyone. This is Lessons from the Field. This is a series of interviews where we talk to a guest who has a passion for pharmacy or pharmaceutical sciences. And today we're featuring Dr. Tyson Park, who is a 2008 graduate of our College of Pharmacy. Dr. Park is currently head of operations and value-based contracting and market access for Teva Pharmaceuticals. For this Lessons of the Field, we're going to ask Tyson a number of questions, and these questions will help us better understand his career and insight and advice that he might have for our students and alumni and friends who are listening. So let's go ahead and get started. If you could walk us through your career since you left UIC and in a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated from 2008 from the UIC School of Pharmacy, and I did what a lot of you do, which is I picked up a staff position at Walgreens to kind of bridge myself. I knew that I always wanted to get into the business aspects of things. So at that time point, it was still possible to kind of get a contracting job at a pharmaceutical manufacturer. And I was able to, after a few months of kind of trying, get into Takeda Pharmaceuticals. They were based in Deerfield at the time, and I was in medical information. Was able to transition that into a full-time position there. I stayed there for about 4 years. I did medical information for the majority of that time, moved over into promotional advertising review. So the kind of the scientific and medical review of advertising that they pulled together, and was able to transition that into a job where they say into the field. So I was a liaison in the field that worked with health systems, health plans, pharmacy benefit managers. And that's what kind of took me to New York City. Like you see pretty commonly in the pharmaceutical industry, as products kind of go through their life cycle, lose their patent protection, you'll typically have some cycling of departments. Unfortunately, I was the victim of one of those, but I would actually argue it was probably one of the most fortunate things that happened in my career, because it really forced me to think very critically about what I wanted to do, what I was doing, make me have to rely a little bit more on my wits. Fortunately, I was able to kind of pick up with Medscape education, part of WebMD, doing continuing medical education programs, and particularly focusing on those CME programs that were sponsored by manufacturers, both pharmaceutical and device. I was given 4 therapeutic areas, and I needed to understand, for any given company and their product, what's the way that you want to line up the learning objectives that kind of teased out the parts of the disease state or therapeutic area that that company may be more interested in. Needed to understand the type of physicians, pharmacists, nurses, PAs that would be most relevant to represent those teachings. Learned a lot about kind of life and how things operate from a business standpoint with my time there. Did that for a little over a year, and then a friend of mine got me into Teva Pharmaceuticals. Did the similar job that I left Takeda at, working with health plans, pharmacy benefit managers, health systems. Kind of worked my way up into kind of the first change was running the materials that the team had available to them to use with pharmacy benefit managers and health plans, those customers, budget impact models, ways of translating phase 3 study data to make it articulate, and that progression for me was about 5 years. When I've been at Teva now for a little over 7, and through that time I'd always been working with payers, and so the U.S. healthcare system is a very challenging space to really understand. It's not an easy job for folks to try to academically teach how it's structured. But based on kind of my real life experience, the commercial side of the organization saw that there were some things that I might be able to bring over. I was a published kind of HEO, health economics and outcomes researcher, while I was on the medical affairs side. So I've been on the commercial side for a little over a year and a half now, and got to really learn the nitty gritty of how products make their way through our supply system, how products are brought onto our health insurance benefit structure. What are the things that are looked at, and really got through a lot of what might seem somewhat magical. And I think one of the big terms that I've been using a lot recently is there is no magic. There is a reason and rationale to why things are the way that they
Right.
are. And that's what brings me to this video call today.
All right. Well, excellent. Great. It sounds like you've gotten great experience along the way and interesting variety of companies that you've worked for and put your skills to use at, and obviously continue to hone those and um, building off of the platform that you received from the College of Pharmacy. So maybe, again, we have some questions we're going to ask you here. Let me just ask you, in your position now, or kind of maybe more generally in pharmacy, what excites you? What keeps you going every day? What gets you out of bed?
Yeah. So, outside of pharmacy, there's probably quite a bit of a competitive nature that drives why I get excited. And part of it is why I got attracted to the business side, wanting to compete
Mhm.
and kind of do better than maybe my peers or peer organizations. But you know, we are pretty blessed in 2020. The level of sophistication that science has been able to bring us from a pharmaceutical standpoint. I mean, I remember when I was completing my doctorate at UIC, I actually I recall hepatitis C treatments. And I remember talking about ribavirin. I remember talking about interferon.
Yeah.
We have a single pill that can cure it in as quick as 8 weeks. I
Yeah.
mean, unheard of leaps in technology and innovation. We have been able to take out your immune system, your immune cells, right? Modify them, reinfuse it back in there to attack a specific mutation associated with the cancer. It's that part, I think, gets a little bit lost in the shuffle in either political discussions or when you kind of talk about science and medicine writ large. But that part is just, it's amazing to me, and it is extremely exciting. How things have progressed even since I graduated from UIC, and then
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
lot of what drives me.
That's great. Well, it's so true too, and it's just going to continue to accelerate, right? So good stuff. Thanks for that. I think that's real helpful. And maybe stepping back a little bit now and look over the course of your career, could fill us in on either the experiences that you've had that most influenced you, or maybe changed your course. And you mentioned a couple of those, or the people that really influenced you or informed you along the way, and what advice maybe that might impart for those listening.
Yeah, I think, first on kind of the people part of it, I wouldn't say that I've necessarily had kind of a steady mentor that I've been able to kind of work with. I think that's kind of an ideal scenario, but for those of us that aren't as blessed to be able to have somebody that we can kind of look towards in that kind of a clean a manner, it's constantly talking to your peers and people that are maybe one step ahead of you in terms of their career progression, just to kind of get different perspectives. I'm not a creative person. I'm obviously an analytic person that loved kind of sciences and math, which is why I kind of ended up where I did. I don't have a lot of ability on my own to be incredibly creative and innovative, but I can become more creative and innovative when I get certain inspirations from the folks that I speak to.
Right.
So in terms of just as a general, overall sentiment, making sure that you're constantly talking to people, um, that's been the biggest generation of kind of inspiration and aha moments for me. As far as kind of staying on top of things, I've been fortunate enough where I do have quite a bit of kind of natural curiosity. And I used to think of, there's a lot of complex things. I remember many things as I was coming out of pharmacy school seemed unbelievably complex. But really what it is that you just probably haven't had enough experiences against those complex thoughts for you to be able to kind of break it down and make those dots connect and make it make sense to you. And for me, a lot of that came from being able to ask my colleagues at Teva that worked in different departments. Fortunately, I've had a lot of time to kind of figure it out on my own. It doesn't happen necessarily very quickly. This is the part where I do kind of think about Malcolm Gladwell's concept of 10,000 hours to become an expert in any one field. I do think that there's a lot of truth in that. And it's to say that, you know, you can only make interpretations and start seeing some conclusions that can be drawn once you have enough data points, right? I mean, kind of drawing it back to this concept of power in statistical calculation, right? It is very inherent and intrinsic to a lot of the pharmaceutical concepts that as students were taught. But in order to kind of get all those data points, you can only do that by talking with people, right? And trying and being curious and reading. And so that's one of the big ways that I was able to do that, was have those conversations, very frank conversations with my peers at the company in different departments. And, you know, it has definitely come with a lot of trial and error. I mean, I've definitely looked very silly. I've definitely rubbed people the wrong way with some of my hot takes. But that's the way that I've learned. And, you know, it's a big part of why I'm where I am today.
Wow, that's great, I think, for the listeners. It reminds me, we had a speaker yesterday that was echoing kind of some of what you just said, in that kind of who you surround yourself with, and also, you know, finding a safe place to practice, you know, and make those mistakes and, you know, bird brain ideas. But unless you go through that process, you don't get better. So
yeah.
thanks.
And if I could just kind of say, it kind of goes back to that mentor comment, right? The mentor-mentee relationship is supposed to be that safe place,
Right,
for you to
right.
kind of figure that out with somebody that can be a guide for you. But, you know, depending on how wide or wide a breadth you want in terms of what you want to experience or have knowledge around, that I think that's the part where having a single mentor, you know, that model can break down a little bit, because you're only going to be able to push the boundaries as far as that mentor is able to kind of construct that for you. So,
That's
you know, I
true.
think that's something that kind of resonates with me.
Yeah, no, I agree. Getting different perspectives, different input by having other people that you are doing that with. So, Tyson, you already kind of talked about some of this. You clearly have thought a lot about and spent time improving yourself and your skills. And just as you were saying, the 10,000 hours and the data points and statistical power, I mean, that all kind of is the response to this next question, which is how do you continue to expand your knowledge, experience, and expertise to stay relevant and to continue to grow. But you've answered that a little bit. Is there any more any other thoughts you might have on that subject?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think I can use kind of something that I'm going through right now. You know, then this is the part of me, probably a little bit more value-based contracting than it is operations, but the value-based contracting is the practical application of it that provides some tangible feedback on what the impact is. And then operations is how it actually gets executed, right? And you know, I'm not somebody that's very good with Excel spreadsheets. I am not a computer programmer. I am not a SQL programmer. But I understand, as I try to understand more about the business application or implications of certain things, you need to have a working understanding of these things. And as you identify this stuff, you know, you need to be curious enough and ambitious enough to kind of try to figure it out to the degree that would be helpful in serving you or your organization. So one thing that I've been looking at, and if you go into my Google history a little bit, so Google probably already knows this about me, is that I've looked at taking some kind of very preliminary or rudimentary SQL programming classes. Not because I'm intending to pivot and become a SQL programmer by any means, but so that if I ever get to the point where I've got a wide enough remit to where I may have a few people reporting to me that do programming, that are able to mine gigantic databases to try to answer questions and structure that data in a way to kind of answer part of that question, I'm going to need to have some working knowledge of how that works, right? And those are the ways that I've been kind of able to keep pushing the boundary on it. Listen, there's no shame in, we rarely talk about the 360 degrees of quality of life, right? There's no shame in recognizing that I'm happy with what I've got. I'm fulfilled. I'm satisfied. There may be little things that you might do within your profession, but you decide that a lot of that ambitious energy I want to apply towards spending time with my kids or my wife or my family, my parents, whatever it might be. That's great. And I think it's being able to kind of contextualize it on the same spectrum to say it's important to me. I often have to kind of have that conversation with myself. It's why I probably don't progress as fast as I might hold myself as a standard to, depending on who I'm talking to. And that, I think, a challenge that probably all of us experience, once we get out of school. So, those have been kind of some guiding posts for how I, kind of grade myself on how I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, that's very helpful, Tyson. I mean, you're right. I think all of us have to balance those things. And, I think the ones who do it best are probably the ones who consciously think about it, just as it sounds you have. And it's trade-offs, right? I mean, you can only spend only so much time in the day, and you can put so much energy into this or that. And obviously, I think being more, having some balance in your life is important in the longer term. So it sounds like you've really thought about that. And it's something that, our students, those who graduate, early in their career have to learn, and I think it also changes over your career too. As you become more proficient at what you're doing, you do have more time to spend and other things. So thanks for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe going back now even further to your time at UIC, maybe reflect on that a little bit, and how that time at UIC helped prepare you, maybe what advice you'd give for our current students who are in that position now and are looking forward to where you currently are and wondering how they're going to get there.
Yeah. So I'll be honest. I'll be the first one to say I wasn't the best student. I definitely I should have been more engaged. I think I've had a series of realizations since my time at UIC that made me realize, well, first of all, oh my goodness, they did teach me an unbelievable amount of stuff, whether or not I was ready to learn it at that time. And I do think about things that I picked up while I was at UIC, even to this day now, kind of 12 to 13 years after the fact. One thing that I probably wasn't mature enough to understand at the time, I very clearly remember, we had a class where we had to break down literature, right? Peer-reviewed published literature. We had to understand how to do Boolean searching, things that seemed irrelevant at the time, right? I just didn't understand what it was. All it took was having to go into the business world, right? Working in medical information at Takeda to realize you need to be able to break down a phase 3 study. You need to be able to break down a phase 3 study in comparison with other phase 3 studies in that market basket or that therapeutic basket, so that you can make comparative analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
I realized that there was a rhyme and reason and rationale for why we were taught what we were taught. I even remember, as far as advice goes, UIC is, a top 10 school year over year and has been for at least 16 years that I'm aware of, but probably much longer than that for a very specific reason, but it's not the only reason. It's the amount of resources that are available, right? The pharmacy that's on campus that's kind of fully integrated into the health system. Those are resources. I mean, does it mean that you need to commit to it and have a job there because it is competitive, right? There isn't an unlimited number of positions. No, but you can still volunteer for projects. You can still volunteer your time there. Those things will benefit you at some point in your future. And I encourage students to take advantage of those opportunities. I remember, the way that I ended up leveraging those opportunities was typically happenstance. I mean, I needed some extra dollars. And so a project would come up from a professor that they posted. I remember one of them was going in and being a spreadsheet junkie, right? It was just to go in there. It was an ID department. And it was the pharmacist was just wanting to structure data on what the results were from the cultures and what the ultimate drug was that was applied to that patient's regimen. And even that kind of, I'm able to recall that, and it resonates with me, 13 years after the fact. Take those opportunities, seek them out. Even if, I'm not asking you to do it for 4 years or even a full year, but get yourself exposed to it. You'll be shocked how useful it is at some point down the line for yourself.
Yeah, great advice, Tyson. Thank you. So we have a couple more questions here. Maybe I'll try to combine these a little bit, but see, was there at some point along the road that you took, whether it was at UIC or afterwards in your career, where there was kind of a Eureka moment or some big event that really, you kind of mentioned it at the beginning with the job change, but maybe there was others.
Yeah, so I'll talk about one that's kind of a little bit more recent and probably more applicable in today's world and in where healthcare is in the U.S. And globally. So the Eureka moment was understanding that a pharmacy claim is a pharmacy claim is a pharmacy claim is a pharmacy claim. You would be shocked at how many things are dependent on that little thing that you do at the pharmacy, where you go through your system, you type in what the drug is, you put in the patient's insurance, and you press enter. And it goes off into the netherworld, and it bounces off a bunch of systems. It comes back to you as approved or denied, and you put the bag on the shelf and wait for the patient to come back, right? The software and the data that's involved when you press enter is the pharmacy claim. You would be shocked at how much of our understanding of how the healthcare system operates is based on you having pressed enter there. It is what HEOR departments, health economics outcomes research departments, the databases that are going in there to use, that transaction is literally what they're mining to make their analyses. It's what pharmacy departments at a hospital system might be looking at to get a better sense of how much they should be stocking of any one product, how many patients they might have with a certain disease state. It's what insurance companies are using to determine what the premium should be quarter over quarter or year over year. It's really the DNA of understanding how much healthcare utilization is used and what type of healthcare utilization is used. Now, we're obviously talking just specifically about drugs, right? But understand that when you break it down to its component parts, is the way that all of our system is kind of coded for us to be able to kind of scale out for 330 million Americans and make some assessments of what healthcare utilization looks like in the US. And that was a big aha moment. That only happened maybe about a year and a half ago for me. Very challenging concept for people to pick up. Typically because the people that work with that data work with it in very siloed manners. And I've had the fortune of being able to go from one silo to another, which is why I was kind of able to tease that together. But I've seen that it's a very, very challenging concept for folks to pick up.
Yeah. Unless you've seen it on the back end in the aggregate and all of the millions of claims that have come through, and then when that's paired up with medical claims and then the impact that can have on decision making all across the health system. Yeah, it is phenomenal. I'm glad you pointed that out. It's obviously something that people's careers are based on. It's major decisions by pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies.
By the government.
Yeah, government. Yeah, so much depends on that data. So that's great stuff, and obviously creates a lot of opportunities for our students and pharmacists in general, and beyond just working in those pharmacies. There's the data and all of the ramifications of it that create opportunities for us. So Let me wrap up, Tyson, with just a last question for the, for our audience, our students, recent graduates or other alumni. We always ask this, if there's a best piece of advice that you have, either that you heard from somebody else or just that you've thought of over time, given your experience, and whether it's for students or life in general or career or whatever. If you have some great words of wisdom, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm 39 now, right? I've been out of the school for going on 12 years. What I've learned about advice, it kind of gets back to this scalability effect. It's what resonates with me today would definitely not have resonated with me 4 years ago. And the advice that I would give that I think makes sense now only is going to really resonate with a small percentage of the audience, right? And the more I try to reach the widest audience possible, the less useful and more cliche the advice becomes. So, I think for me, it's some combination of always being curious, right? But being very comfortable reaching out and looking foolish, trying to, network, right? But be willing to embarrass yourself a little bit, right? Be willing to put yourself out there and be vulnerable. Reach out. Mm-hmm. I love it when students or recent grads reach out to me to network. I will always take that call. I will always want to do a call, not just an email. And I end up talking to them. I overwhelm more than 50% of the people that I've talked to. But I do that as a way to hopefully kind of get them to reach back out to me. I haven't had a lot of people that are repeat contactors. I would encourage you to try to do that as much as possible and set what's reasonable goal for yourself, Try not to hold yourself to other people's standards. We typically hold ourselves to the top 5%, the standards of the top 5%. And that's where a lot of failure happens, right? We're not, 95% of us are not the top 5%. So we got to figure out some way to translate that into something that's usable and motivates us, and not to get too discouraged based on it. I think that's the best thing that I can kind of provide at this time point.
Great. I mean, that's perfect, because it harkens back to what you said earlier about taking those risks and just, the mentorship, safe space, and not being afraid to make mistakes. And you heard it here first, folks. Dr. Park is always willing to take your call. So if you don't mind, we'll let our students know if any of them are game to contact you and get some advice.
Best part about social media these days, it's very easy to find me, right? I'm on LinkedIn. You guys can reach out there. You guys could also just directly reach out to me. It's just tysonpark@gmail.com. So I encourage you to do that. And not just me, right? Whoever you find.
Yes.
You gotta reach out to people before you find the person that you're able to connect with that could really help you. It does become a little bit of a numbers game at some point, right? So
yeah. Well, thanks, Tyson. This was fabulous. I know the listeners are going to get a lot out of this, and I hope that, and I believe that some of what you said is going to resonate and maybe change somebody's course of their career. So thank you very much. It's great to see you again. We're proud of everything that you've done, and we love being able to talk to alumni like you have really moved up in the world, and which is the case for most of ours. So thank you very much.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much, Dean Schumock.